Hello, I'm Lord Stockton. I'm helping to organise and fronting David Amos's virtual book tour. Great deal more comfortable than real book tours, which as a publisher I know all about. David is a wonderful man, and he is the living embodiment of what is good about politics and Parliament. David went into politics not because he wanted to become rich or famous or even notorious, but because he wanted to help people. And he believed that the best way he could help them was to be their representative on the council, in the constituency, and in the nation at large. He has always done this with only the very best intentions. As a result, he is admired and is a friend of almost everyone, even the civil servants who he badgers endlessly about Southend becoming a city. They admire him, albeit a little ruefully. I don't think that there's anyone in politics today who is as straightforward and as honourable as David is. I know that during the so-called book tour, he's going to be interviewed by Sarah Dines and Mark Menzies, who are two of his colleagues in the House of Commons, and I'm sure they will be both fair but also rigorous when they talk to him. Finally, I think all I can say is that I am very fond of David, and I am very proud to be able to call him my friend.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
If anyone has any questions they would like to ask me, if they post it in the live chat section in the comments column, I'd be pleased to answer those questions. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome you all from the great counties of Derbyshire and Lancashire. And tonight I have two of my colleagues who see themselves as Oprah Winfrey, my good friend Sarah Dines, and Mark Menzies from Lancashire, who sees himself as a much younger version of Michael Parkinson. So the idea is that they're both going to ask me questions about my book and my life so far in Parliament. Who wants to start?
Well, David, I'll get this started, and just to prove that I've read it, here we are, Eyes and Ears. But David, I first became aware of you in 1983 at your general election when you were standing in Basildon. And I think I was a young, impressionable 16-year-old watching the television. And that for me was a real indicator that things were going well for us when you won in Basildon. I think you're up against the Labour candidate, Richards, Julian Holder Philbrook, or some absolutely pretentious name. And you saw him off with great aplomb. And fast forward to 92, I was then helping Michael Forsyth and Stirling. And although we'd had the exit poll, nobody kind of believed it. And Stirling, Michael's majority was of like 500 or something like that. So it was, it could have gone either way. but when your result came in, we started to think, no, in fact, we didn't start to think, furniture went everywhere. I mean, Michael and his team had gone to the count, so I was with the sort of hardcore supporters in the association office in Gladstone Place, and the furniture went flying, people whooping and cheering, because it started to become real. So I think one of the reasons why everyone remembers your 92 victory wasn't just because you won, because that was the first time that in marginal seat after marginal seat after marginal seat across the whole country, people thought we might just hang on, we might just do this. And we did. And so that is why, you know, forever, this will be something that you are attested to, David. But I mean, one of the things I wanted to sort of ask you about is, you know, your experience of being an MP and how that has changed over the years. I mean, how's campaigning changed, for example?
Oh, Mark, it's changed dramatically. Obviously, Sarah has got an insight, particularly into Basildon itself. But going back to 1983, I think some of our older viewers tonight may have been aware of that particularly incredible victory from my point of view, because it was my childhood's ambition come true. For me, without any question, that first victory in 1983, when we didn't even have a pubescent local newspaper reporter there to cover it, because being the 144 horse Labour held seat that could be won by the Conservative Party, because it was a newly constructed seat, it just wasn't on the radar that we could possibly win. But fast forward, Mark, to the point that you made about 1992, I think when I'm lowered into the ground because I'm going to be buried, possibly the only thing that I will be remembered for is when I became famous for 30 seconds, because the then Labour Council hated me so much. This is what they did. They employed 100 Barclays bank tellers to get the count done within an hour. Can you imagine that? In an hour. And when I got a phone call in my Westminster office from David Dimbleby and Anna Ford saying they both wanted to conduct the first interviews with me, I thought, my goodness, well, why? And then, of course, it was later that the penny dropped, that the Labour Party had told all these people, if you want to see live on national television, the first Conservative Member of Parliament to lose their seat and be humiliated. So that's what they did. And I will never, I mean, it was just extraordinary to arrive at a count like that, whereby we had a huge media presence following us around all the time. Very different to the way it is now. And with a count within under an hour, it's very difficult to tell how it's going. But my goodness, when we were called onto the stage and the Labour chair of the council was shaking like that as he read out the result, and I was the winner, it was just fantastic. You saw Labour people on the counting trestles beating their hands and their heads. They were absolutely distraught about the whole thing. And of course, the script had gone completely wrong. So those famous reporters had to suddenly somehow... And if I say to you, Mark and Sarah, what happened afterwards, for a week, I would be stopped wherever I went by members of the general public because they'd seen it all on TV. And I had letters all over the world congratulating me from winning the election. Well, of course, I didn't win the election. I was just the first person to have been reported that night. But you asked me, Mark, you mentioned Michael Forsyth, great guy and doing as well as ever in the House of Lords. How things have changed. I think campaigning is dramatically different today to how it was then. I mean, it was intensive, knocking on the doors, putting yourself in front of people's faces, saying, are you going to vote for me? I still do all that now. We didn't have anything as sophisticated as telephone canvassing or targeting drops. It really has changed so much from what happened. I would say, Mark, I still enjoy campaigning but it isn't quite as much fun as it used to be because social media has changed things dramatically.
And David, I mean, one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on before I hand over to Sarah is being a member of Parliament is, yes, being a constituency champion, and no one can doubt, you being constituency champion either in Basildon or Southend West, because when you were in Basildon, every time you stood up, Basildon was always in the question you were asking. You often, I think, always by name. And your campaign to make Southend West a city is now, etched in the hearts of several prime ministers. And your campaign against I know it as the misery line, but the railway line that serves Southend, misery line, because that's how you refer to it, because it's not up to scratch your constituents. But it's also about being a legislator and dealing with all the things that come through Parliament. And I know they're often big controversial votes, but we'll come to that later. But it's also about being a representative of your country, being involved in international affairs, part of international delegations, often for a whole range of issues. So can you tell me about some of the memorable foreign trips that you've been on? And have all of our colleagues that you've travelled with been fabulous people, or have there ever been any ghastly colleagues on any trip that you've been on?
Well, Mark, look, the esteem in which members of Parliament has altered over the last 4 decades. It's absolutely unrecognisable. The idea that going on a foreign trip would be condemned or criticised to the way it is now, it just didn't happen, really. And I do say to all my new colleagues, we're not a parish councillor, and it's great if people want to be parish councillors. We're not a district council, county councillor. We serve on a national platform, and it's ridiculous that we should be criticised for going abroad. We need to physically go to other countries to engage with them, not in terms of just the economy, but in terms of order. I mean, I have to say, Mark, if we hadn't slightly weakened our connections, we wouldn't be quite in the situation we are at the moment, trying to deal with a pandemic, which hopefully we're getting grips on. But look, I've been very, very fortunate, Mark. I've travelled all over the world. One example I would give you, as a reward, I was Michael Portillo's private parliamentary secretary when he was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and William Hague was private parliamentary secretary to the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont. And Peter Viggers, cruelly panned because of the Duck House and all that, but he was a great parliamentarian. He was the chairman of the all-party parliamentary group to Japan. And myself, William Hague, 2 other Labour members went on this trip to Japan. It was absolutely fantastic. And our host was the then Speaker of Japan. I mean, how a chap in his 80s can sit cross-legged on the floor, I don't know. We were all young, and we found it very difficult to eat food cross-legged, and we weren't used to eating in those days raw fish and eggs and all of that. But we went to see where the nuclear bombs exploded. Absolutely extraordinary visit. And I had arranged that I would go around the world after the trip had finished to go to Hawaii at my own expense. All of a sudden, we got a note to say, got to abandon the trip and come back to Westminster. Remember, we were both PPSs to the Treasury because of the collapse of the pound and the run on sterling, the exchange rate mechanism and all of that. So the trip was abandoned and we had to come back. That was a very memorable trip. But I've got to tell Mark and Sarah that you really find out what your colleagues are like when you go on a foreign trip with them. And I've only, frankly, I'm not going to tell you who, because one still remains in Parliament. I've only had 2 colleagues who I would regard as a nightmare on these trips. Yeah, look, there are some people who are regularly late, who must ask the first questions at meetings, who always want to go off and do their own things, but absolutely fascinating what goes on. And there's one Essex member, I'm going to keep you guessing, who retired from Parliament, who, when we used to get on the coach trips to go round for these different meetings, would stand in the middle of the corridor of the bus and would get open the House of Commons diary. And he would say, right, we're going to go through colleagues from A to Z, and I want you to comment on them. And you could see one or two colleagues thinking, oh, this isn't the done thing. Oh, my God, by the time you got to B, they would pipe up saying, oh, that person, I don't like them at all. I can't stand their family. And we'd never, ever get anywhere near going through the diary. And again, on a trip to Australia, and then I'll move on to something else, we went into a meeting which was to look around a pharmaceutical factory where you all had to get dressed up in white garments to protect yourselves. And they insisted that we had to wear these silly hats. Well, I'm not kidding you. We ended up really looking like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I and this colleague, we disgraced ourselves. We'd be serious, then we start laughing. And we both had to leave these meetings because we looked absolutely ridiculous. Look, okay, another story. Went to Africa on a trip whereby we got into what they call a taxi. Well, I didn't know aeroplanes operated as a taxi service, but literally in propeller jets, we did 4 up in the air, down. We got to the end of it. I think on one of them I was next to Desmond Tutu. That was an interesting conversation. We landed and we got into a coach to take us off to this safari. We're sitting there and within 2 seconds, everyone's covered in glass. I thought, we've been attacked. What had happened? The person in the taxi hadn't moved away from the aeroplane. The propeller started and blew out all the windows. I've got loads of stories about our foreign trips, but it is totally wrong if constituents criticise us for these trips. It's the only way that you learn about things is frankly by going.
Yeah, David, I would agree with you on that. And I mean, some of the international visits that I've been on have, incredibly impactful stuff. You know, I mean, I've done visit to Iraq. I visited one with Aid to the Church in Need in 2016. And that was after we had taken the decision, quite a controversial decision, but a decision to have RAF intervention in the goings on of the Islamic State. And we went to visit a Christian village up in the mountains. And these people thanked us for, saving their village. And actually, I stopped and I thought, and I walked through the timeline and the chronology of it all. And actually, it wasn't us that had done it, because we had, we may actually come to this, but our parliament had actually voted not to take any action. All too complicated, stop the war and all the rest of it. But thankfully, the Americans, had intervened, because they were intervening in Iraq militarily, not in Syria. And if people had done nothing, all those people would have been executed. Churches would have been burned down, women and children, old people would have been slaughtered. But thankfully, people did do something. And I think that brings it home to you that when we take these votes in Parliament over things that may be thousands of miles away, but by God, they matter. And they matter to ordinary people. Most of these people we will never have the opportunity to meet. But as a parliamentarian, experiencing that firsthand, and I've done similar things on International Aid Select Committee and so on, it really shapes your view and your opinion. And I think you can never get that. No matter how many TV documentaries you watch or whatever, it is your duty as a parliamentarian to have that raw experience, because it really helps to shape the decisions that you take.
Mark, I totally agree with you, and that's really why I'm looking forward to going on an overseas trip with Sarah, which I haven't had the opportunity of yet. But Sarah, I know you've got some questions that you want to ask me.
I do, David. It's lovely to talk to you and Mark today. Can I just take you back for a moment to my beginnings in politics, which coincided with your election to Parliament? As a young Conservative doing my A-levels at Basildon College, we were faced with a very tricky selection for that election back in 1983. I remember it was in a hall in the Basildon part of, rather the Billericay part of the Basildon Billericay as it was then. And we were all assembled, about 60 or 80 of us, and I was a young Conservative representative. Can you tell me what your feelings were when you came before that selection meeting? It may interest others now that are looking to take that route. When you looked out and you had this famous tennis star, Boston Mottram, against you, and there you were, David Amis from the East End. What was going through your mind when you were first selected?
Well, I seem to remember Julia, my wife, keeps reminding me of the semi-final, which was held in a doctor's surgery. And I think Philip Oppenheim and some other people were involved in the shortlist. So I didn't expect through to the final. And it was a big thrill. I have to say, Sarah, and you're not going to take offense at this, I didn't have particularly happy memories of Basildon as a place, because my mother was one of 11 children, and her oldest sister moved to Basildon Newtown when it was first built. So as a tiny child, I used to visit there for funerals, weddings, christenings, and things like that. And I used to think, coming from London, which was old, to go to a new place with all these brick buildings, I don't know, it just seemed a little bit soulless. So the idea that I would be chosen to fly the flag for the Conservative Party in Basildon was extraordinary. And you've mentioned Buster Mottram, who was our then #1 male tennis player. One of my cousins, who wasn't involved in politics, she worked at the Marconi factory there, but she ended up becoming my agent in that first election. Can you believe that, Sarah? Someone became my agent who didn't know the first thing about politics, and we won the seat. Anyway, she phoned me up to say, David, I think you should tune into the national news. They're talking about, it's already been decided who the candidate's going to be. It's our #1 male tennis player. So you asked me how I felt, Sarah. I walked into the room and I didn't expect I had a chance. I saw the faces there, because in those days, even for what was seen as an unwinnable seat or difficult seat, lots of people turned up. And I'm not sure they were all smiling at me. So I just gave it my best shot. I told them about myself. They were sort of having to look at me. Whether that was a good experience or not, I don't know. But it didn't sort of put them off. But when I got the phone call that evening to say that I had actually won the contest, I didn't expect it.
Can you read the faces of people in that hall? Can you read the people that are asking you questions? Are they do they give away much in their faces when they're asking you questions?
Well, I would say, being big-headed, I'm a pretty good reader of people, because before becoming an MP, I was in recruitment, an employment agency. I've interviewed thousands of people. So body language and all of that, I think I've got a pretty good hand on. And I sort of, perhaps it's wrong, but I sum people up pretty quickly. And I did sort of work out, as the interview went on, who was on my side and who wasn't on my side. And I don't know, look, Sarah, we're all political activists, so we know all about planted questions. Initially, I think there were 1 or 2 planted questions which weren't helpful to me. I didn't live in, at that time I lived in Redbridge because I was a Redbridge councillor. But yeah, I think by and large, it seemed to me that the mood of the meeting changed but I wasn't convinced it was anywhere near enough for me to be chosen.
Well, good job you were, and 35 years odd later, even more. Here we are. Can you tell me a little about your early days in Basildon? I seem to remember various sittings at the Red Council chamber, which was most unusual in those times, where some of our members who were little old ladies, one I remember called Dot, actually physically laid down in the chamber. Can you tell us about those early days in what was a very left-wing Labour council and your activists and how hard they worked?
Well, of course I will, Sarah, but I think you're being far too modest, because it was your mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Dines, who was the association chairman and who I owe everything to in getting me off to the best possible start as chairman, frankly. And when I think that, and I hope this will be encouragement to seats which we don't hold in the county of Derbyshire and seats that we don't hold yet in the county of Lancashire, that I didn't have one Conservative county councillor. I just had one Conservative district councillor, and that was your mother. And when I think that 4 weeks before the general election, which I wasn't too pleased about being called, but I understand it was sort of on the back of Falklands, we held the local elections and your mother lost her seat. And we only got 28% of the total votes cast. And I just didn't think we'd have a chance of it. But thanks to your mother bringing together the organisation, you mentioned Dot and other people, hey, we did it. So we didn't have any headquarters. We didn't have a professional agent. Everyone was a volunteer. And I seem to remember, Sarah, that in those days, we had something called the Newtown Commission.
Yeah.
And I think, and they had powers for compulsory purchase and all of that. And through her wonderful negotiation, she acquired for us, under a brilliant lease, 38 Rectory Road. And that is the place that became iconic for the next 15 years. That's where we centred on. And of course, I used to hold my regular surgeries there. And that was all due to your mother. But look, every councillor was Labour. They hated me. And they treated me so badly. And what has followed me throughout the rest of my career, entrenched in my mind, Sarah, that officers should always be non-partisan. They should always be apolitical, but they certainly were not in those days in Basildon. The key officers were working hand in glove with the Labour councillors. And when you think, Sarah, how wicked, the centre of their operations was Fodderwick, and they constructed not a gallows to hang me, they constructed a huge monument to unemployment. And there was an arrow. So they had an arrow going up and up as unemployment increased as a result of technology. Carreras, Rothmans, you remember the cigarette factory there, closing, together with what was going on in Spennymoor in Northern Ireland. And of course, as Margaret tried to sort out the economy, unemployment did rise. And they were sort of saying, if you're unemployed, don't vote Conservative, because they can't create wealth, they can't create jobs. Well, how good it is, Sarah, that they rejected that philosophy in 1983, 1987 and 1992. I mean, I could go on about the way that I was treated through such a wicked partisan local authority. Now, I mean, we should have good relationships with our local authorities. How silly it is not to use a local MP. And before I let you ask more things, I can always recall a civil servant arriving at Basildon Station. I met the civil servant to walk towards whatever was happening. I think it was something to do with the opening of if you think about it, the Towngate Theatre. I think Richard Luce was the minister there, the arts minister, and how controversial that was. The chief executive was not only talking to the civil servant, but to the minister's special advisor, running me down and being anti-conservative. It was just wicked what went on, Sarah, but I survived it all.
You did very well. Do you remember that Basildon was called Mini Moscow down the Thames? Because it was hard left. But what the left didn't appreciate, and they still don't now, to be part of political just for a short while, is that the aspirations of the average man and woman on the street are different. They want to do well. They want opportunities and they want to work hard. They don't want to have the state hand it to them. They just want to be free. What are the comparisons now with back then? We still have, do we not, the man on the street who really does want to be aspirational and wants to see our country do well. That hasn't changed, has it? What analysis do you have about back then and now? Are people really that different, or do they still want the same thing?
Very much the same thing, Sarah. But you're getting into the detail of the whole thing. How stupid it was that the Labour Council erected street signs saying this is a nuclear-free zone area. So there we are. I'm representing a constituency which, God bless her, Margaret Thatcher visited in the 1992 election, where we've got Marconi's, GEC Avionics, trying to defend our country. And there is the council saying to the general public, oh, well, as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, they're not going to be targeted towards Basildon. They're going to avoid it. And that was so wonderful, Sarah, if you recall that 1992 election with Dave Marks, the Labour councillor, reading out the results. I made a speech celebrating my victory and saying, rejoice, rejoice, go out and celebrate. You still have a Conservative Member of Parliament and John Major will still be Prime Minister. But in 4 weeks' time, we have the local elections. And I want local residents in this constituency to vote Conservative and throw out the rotten Labour Council. And they did. Every single one of the 15 candidates won, and every single one of the Labour councillors lost. Fantastic. And they completely, Sarah, did not reckon with the common sense of working class women and men, which is what I was. What do they want? They want the best of their lives. They want their own children to make the most of their God-given talents. They very much believe in an enterprise culture. And you know, Sarah, one of the hugely popular policies was the sale of council houses. We owned a huge number of council and corporation houses. And of course, Margaret pursued the policy of the sale, which was very, very successful. So fast forwarding to today, I think that the British people hold the same values. They are today still very, very patriotic. They're so glad that we have the monarch as the head of state, not a president as Tony Blair wanted. I think again today, they believe in upholding the rule of law. They again today want to live in a well-ordered society. They very much support the enterprise culture, that you need a government who will give people the opportunity to make their most of their lives. You said it, Sarah. Yes, things have changed. Fashions have changed. But underneath it all, people themselves haven't. And that is why they supported the Conservative Party in such large numbers in 1983. And that's why they did the same again on the 12th of December in 2019.
Can I take you to modern days, my election just in December 19 as a new MP. I don't feel such a new MP now, but I am really, because COVID's kept us away from the House and I've still got a lot to learn. But can you tell me about the differences you see when you look back at you as a new MP and how the new MPs such as me are dealing with things now? What are the differences, the most startling differences, do you think, David?
But Sarah, I see you as iconic. You're over 21. You weren't
just over 21.
You weren't just some sort of researcher. You had worked your way through the Conservative Party, knocking on doors, delivering leaflets, organising fundraising things. And I really lament that we don't entirely have that experience with the journey that someone makes to being a member of the general public to becoming a member of parliament. You also said something, Sarah, that was humble. You actually said you've got things to learn. I hope that all colleagues, when they're elected for the first time, said that we've all got something to learn. I'm still learning things, frankly, today. You don't know it all. So to be brutal with you, Sarah, and I didn't enjoy the 2019 general election campaign, knocking on people's doors in bad weather, dark at 4 o'clock, admiring people's Christmas decorations. I didn't enjoy it at all. And I had no idea that we would be hit so quickly with the coronavirus pandemic. So I've got to say to you, Sarah, it's been a rubbish parliament so far. Absolute rubbish. I mean, for all your newly elected colleagues, and it's great that we've got an 80-seat majority, they haven't really been there in a proper parliament. And look, it's lovely that we're able to do tonight's book tour virtually, but it's more than Zoom calls. And as Mark said earlier, with overseas visits, it's personal contacts, frankly. And I think we haven't been able to do, and I'm not critical of the House of Commons authorities because they've been marvellous, but we have not been able to do as good and a robust job as we would have. Look, if I just think of one thing alone, Sarah. Now, some of your viewers tonight might have seen me at Prime Minister's Questions on the 3rd of March. I was lucky enough to be in the hat and drawing out that number 16. Well, we only have Prime Minister's Questions once a week. And we used to have them on a Tuesday and a Thursday for 15 minutes. Really intense. You had to think on your feet and say something profound. Whereas nowadays, for goodness sake, standing up saying, do you agree, Prime Minister, that the sun is shining today? Do you agree with that? Or the opposition's coming out with the most rubbishy questions. So that's all been diminished. And what I'm looking forward to, Sarah, is when we can get back to a proper functioning House of Commons. You see, when I started, we didn't even have the televising of Parliament. Now, your maiden speech, you've got a nice video of it. I don't have a video of it. I've got a creaky sound recording of my maiden speech. We and it isn't like today, it's how you look on TV. Does your mouth as mine does go up one side as I'm speaking? Is your hair all right? Like our Prime Minister is seen as being like a haystack or something. All these things have changed completely. And I think for you as a new MP, I've already said you learn a lot on foreign trips. We've just lost an iconic lady who worked in the tea room. The tea room would be the heart of everything. We would be there until the wee hours of the morning, gossiping about things, but you would learn from these things. I mean, I've got so many stories that I would be able to tell about gossiping in the tea room, really. But that's only just a part of it, Sarah. And our committees aren't functioning properly at the moment. The first committee that I served on when I made my maiden speech, not in 1983, but it was in January 1984, because I was hanging on to make my maiden speech on the rate capping bill. Do you remember all that?
Yeah.
Because the rates were being capped in Basildon, it was very important. I made my maiden speech on that occasion. Well, when I think of the way you make your maiden speech now, the whips tell you, get it over and done with, etc. Hang on, the only time Parliament listens to you, I guarantee, is when you make your maiden speech. So my maiden speech was delivered on me holding up little postcards, was written with John Maiden, who was then my whip. The two of us sat down writing out the maiden speech. The chamber was absolutely packed, and I followed Ted Heath. And it goes, obviously, opposition government, absolutely packed. And the public gallery was packed with people. Bernard Weatherall, the speaker, sent me a little handwritten note, as does Matthew Parrish. So I say to new members, which I didn't have the chance to this time, cherish a maiden speech. It's very, very special. And I don't have the souvenir of a video, which all of you do today. But when I think of making my maiden speech on the rate capping bill, the committee stage of it, it sat for 150 hours. We did 2 all-night sittings. Patrick Jenkin was the Secretary of State. And I can see him now calling the committee members into his office saying, well, colleagues, I want the bill. What's he talking about? He wants the bill. I assume he does want the bill. But that's how it was. And during those stages, because I'm David Amos, I was the first to be called to vote. On 2 occasions, every colleague was asleep, including the chairman. So the only person awake was the Labour person. I think it was Mr. Cowan. I mean, most of these people, well, they're not in Parliament anymore or are dead. He suddenly sat down. I think he'd been speaking for 5 hours, a filibuster. And of course, the Hansard reporters were awake, but not the members of Parliament. They were slumped over the bench like that. And suddenly the chairman woke up and he said, oh, I do apologise to the committee. I think it was on automatic pilot. But Patrick Jenkin has said to me, David, you've got to stay awake, because when there is a division, you'll be the first to be called. So things have changed dramatically. But I'm really looking forward, Sarah, to us all getting back and trying to learn more about our newly elected colleagues, because frankly, judging by some, there seems to be a contest now on who's been in the gutter or lower than the gutter, a little bit like EDPF. We've got huge numbers of working class Conservative MPs, and I've listened recently, now I'm not going to name them, to 1 or 2 of them speak, and their stories are absolutely incredible. And I'm looking forward to getting to know them much more, because it really does wind up the Labour Party.
I think over to Mark now. Mark.
Yeah, David, I mean, one of the things that you refer to in your book, you talk about the coalition years, and that was when I entered Parliament. I came in the 2010 election, and we were back in government again, albeit in coalition, after, all that period under Blair and Brown. I'm interested, what's your take on those coalition years?
Mark, I hated it. As a schoolboy, I was taught that coalition governments you only entered into in war, not peacetime. And I don't know whether it's the same for Sarah, but I'd been used to fighting Labour in Basildon. But when I came to Southend West in my early days, it was Liberal. And I really found at first hand the Liberals were much nastier than Labour. Labour people told you straight what they thought about you. Liberals, it was much more underhanded. So in 2010, they were really the enemy. And the idea that we were going to join with them. And Mark, as the negotiations went on, and of course you were a newly elected MP, I remember us being called to Committee Room 14, the 22. I think we were called 3 times there to tell us what was going on. And I was at the back of the room, as is my wont, with quite experienced colleagues there, looking round, seeing how excited your intake were, because we were going into this coalition with us experienced members thinking, oh no, we don't want to do it. We want to be a minority-led government. So I was not happy, Mark. But hey, I'm going to tell it like it is. I was wrong. David Cameron, whatever anyone thinks about him, he was a master of his brief. I'm thankful. I know he didn't want the same result, but I'm thankful he gave me the referendum about our membership of Europe. I will always thank him for that. He was an outstanding parliamentarian, as was his Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was very young, George Osborne. And he dominated proceedings at the dispatch box. And frankly, he set the Liberals up for what was a huge fall. In the next election, they couldn't get away from what they had done over student fees and other matters like that. And of course, we all know in the next election, but as you know, Mark, I'm on the chairman's panel. I chair proceedings. It was really weird for me to chair proceedings and call the minister, who wasn't Conservative, wasn't Labour. So I think in looking back on it, Mark, it was successful. We got so many good things done. But I personally, for partisan reasons, found it quite difficult to cope with.
And David, one of the things that you've already talked about, and you talk a lot about in your book, is how Parliament has changed and how MPs have changed, a different type of person that is MP. And I've seen that, even through my 10 years. Look at the composition of the parliamentary party now and compare it to then. Is there anyone that, when you're looking back on people that are perhaps no longer with us, and I don't just mean as MPs, but people that have now, passed away, is there any colleagues that from your time that stand out?
Mark, the most impressive politician that I've ever met or worked with is Margaret Thatcher. She is head above everyone. And I know there's a debate, Mark and Sarah, in our party now, not to keep going back to Thatcherism, but she changed our country and she changed the world and she made them both better places in which to live. And as I was privileged to meet Mikhail Gorbachev, when we had Margaret Thatcher, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan as heads of their countries, this was a better world in which we lived. And it's such a shame now that across the board, we don't have quite that caliber, it seems to me, of world leaders that we did then. So she would easily be the most outstanding. And we had great parliamentarians like John Biffin, Michael Heseltine, Leon Britton. I mean, I could go on and on about the outstanding parliamentarians. On the other side, Michael Foot, I was there when he was at the top of his game. Tony Benn, forget his left-wing views. He was absolutely incredible. Shirley Williams, Roy Jenkins. And look, how lucky was I to be there when Enoch Powell was there. He was one of the most incredible orators I've ever met. He didn't have an MP's office. His office was the House of Commons Library. Absolutely outstanding. And I think, Mark, to judge the current group of parliamentarians to those outstanding then is quite tricky, really, because the sort of skills that you need today are very, very different, really. Remember when I started, Mark, my secretary, who I didn't know at the time was in her 90s, she would be on a golf ball typewriter. And nowadays, the skill of the internet has changed things dramatically, really. So I think the type of person who becomes an MP is very different. But what I would say underneath it, Mark, and in conclusion, is you can't become an MP without having a good amount of common sense. Doesn't matter what party you belong to. And common sense, I find on occasions, is wanting, frankly. And I do also think it's good to have had what I call a job outside politics before you become an MP, to have a real solid, good experience of life.
Now, David, when I got this book, the first thing that I did was I went to the index to see what you were saying about me. And of course, you didn't mention me. So to say that I was devastated after having bought 10 copies is an understatement. So how are you planning to correct this, David?
Well, look, Mark, the truth is I've already done a second book. It's not about politics, it's about animals. And then I've done a third book, which again isn't on politics. It's about a bit scary, the start of life to what happens after we die. The next book on politics can't be released until I've left the place. Now, I mean, look at me. Everyone can tell I'm only halfway through my parliamentary career. So although you can't plan things, but when eventually I've left the place, hopefully voluntarily, there will be a book, but I can't release it at the moment, Mark, because I just don't have the money to employ the sort of libel lawyers that I will need. And it's not going to be a wicked kiss and tell book, but it's just going to tell it like it is.
And of course, David, the proceeds of this book are going towards, 3 charities that are incredibly close to your heart. And one of them is Music Man. And you in the past have invited me to the fabulous event that was held at the Royal Albert Hall. But on that occasion, I had an event in Fylde, so I couldn't make it. So what's next for Music Man?
Well, the Music Man project, thanks for mentioning it, Mark, because as you say, all the royalties go to the 3 charities. Through a wonderful chap called David Stanley, who was the deputy head at one of our wonderful local schools, he specialised in helping people with learning difficulties. And when I go back to my first days in 1983, when I used to see people in straitjackets, that, thank God, doesn't happen now. And we do something with them. And Mark, to see the look on the faces of the friends and relatives when, through the power of music, they performed at the London Palladium, in the Royal Albert Hall, and we're going to go to Broadway. We would have gone to Broadway if it hadn't been for the coronavirus pandemic. I'm hoping we either perform at Broadway or in the Carnegie Hall. I think it's an absolutely wonderful thing that this local constituent has done.
I mean, that's something. I mean, I was a patron of the Omerod Trust, which was a charity looking after, adults with you to Broadway to watch these people perform. I would be truly honoured to do that, and it would make up for me missing, the Royal Albert Hall. But prostate, which is obviously dealing with the issues around sort of men's prostate cancer, that's another one of your charities.
Yes, Mark, because we and just to catch you again, so if we will go to Broadway. You might possibly make the trip.
David, I'm saving up for it already.
Okay.
I'm saving up.
Well, we men aren't as good as ladies looking out for ourselves. And no one wants to talk about prostate. But again, a local constituent had prostate cancer through a gene therapy, managed to overcome it. And again, Mark, you're right. I'm supporting him with that charity.
David, that's great. Listen, juggling the job of an MP, I've got another meeting, even at this stage in the evening that I need to run off to. But I'll leave the last words to Sarah.
Thank you. I just want to say, David, how pleased I was that you did get one of the lady charities for endometriosis. I think that's fantastic. It's a much spoken about condition, and it affects a large number of the population. So I was really touched that you chose that as one of your 3 charities. So thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, I might be the father of 5 children, and 4 of them are daughters, but I'd never heard of endometriosis until a constituent called Carla Cressy came and told me about it. And I'm grateful for her now that we're able to raise this issue, which affects 1.5 million people. So thank you for that. And I want to thank you, Mark, and you, Sarah, not for just being my friends, but giving up your valuable time this evening to interview me about my book. And can I be your agent then as you host your chat shows in the future? And I want to thank the wonderful people of the two great counties of Derbyshire and Lancashire for joining us for this virtual book tour event this evening. I do hope you enjoy reading my book. Bye, everyone. This is my journey so far, where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.